Welcome everybody to this month's community session. This is our first since May, I believe. We missed June just due to not quite having the content there for it. So welcome everybody. It's good to see everybody again and to see everybody back. Today we've got a couple of discussions / presentations from the community, which is awesome. We're also going to go through some maintainer updates. And what I'd like to do is promote any discussion or questions that you all might have towards the end of the session today. So in Zoom, you should see a Q&A button down at the bottom. That'll allow you to post questions. And you can drop questions in there. I'll keep an eye on the Q&A as we go through. And then towards the end, we will go through those as well. So if you do have any questions, please do feel free to drop them into that Q&A panel, and we'll do our best to answer them as we go through. Let's kick off with, it seems to be July, not February. Let's kick off with the agenda there. So again, welcome to the community session. We're going to touch on the latest from the release updates of the project. We're then going to take a brief maintainer update. As mentioned, we've got a couple of community demos / discussions. And then at the end, as said, we will hit the Q&A. I'll also be keeping an eye on the agenda that we've got in GitHub. I know we have a question in here around templating and how to use a Scaffolder plugin, etc. We are going to run through that. Benny's going to take us through that towards the end of the session as well. But I'll keep an eye here if there's any more topics that do come up as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it across to Ben with the latest on the release highlights.
Hello. Yeah, kind of a smaller release this time around. Been a lot of vacations from the maintainer side, so trying to keep the release small. There's been some progress on Material UI 5, so we pushed out an initial version of support for Material UI 5 with the unified theme provider in 1.15. We found some issues with that with the release, so we tried to fix some of those issues in 1.16. So please go ahead and give it a try and see if there's anything else that we have missed. Yes, there has been some movement for new backend system support in some new plugins, and there's also some smaller breaking changes to the incremental ingestion module. So if you use that, you need to just go ahead and update that. I saw it in the changelog as well. It's kind of a simple change. Wait to go ahead and fix that. Yeah. I can go to the maintainer update now, right? Yeah. Yep. Yes, so normal services kind of resume now. There's some people back, both Freven and Patrick is back now, as well as me, although I am off next week, but I'm back after that. And then, yeah, we're hoping to ship the Scaffolder next work in 1.17, which, yeah, we're trying to get this in the a kind of an early next release, so probably next week, where we switch over to use the Scaffolder next work as the default entry point to the Scaffolder plugin. It means right now that, I mean, currently there is a breaking change, but we've had a few discussions internally to maybe we don't actually need to make that breaking change and we can actually just ship it as is, so that it's kind of just a drop-in replacement and less work for people to do. There's still a few decisions to make there if we're going to do this or not, because it means that we're going to have to maintain some of the React.json schema form types ourselves. Which could also be a burden, but there's still some discussions on that, and we'll have more information soon. Yes, that's kind of it, short and sweet from my side. Perfect.
Thanks, Ben. We'll come back to you after the demos, if that's all right, to get onto the Scaffolder and software templates questions. But Mr. Taras, if you're all right, I'd like to hand across to you, sir. You had raised in the issue running the Backstage instance in multiple environments.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Lee. All right, folks, I'm going to share my screen. And what I want to talk about, it's something that we had to do recently with one of our clients, because we rolled out a event-based ingestion, and so we wanted to test it. But it actually, we found out that it has actually its own kind of interesting testing scenarios, because the the challenge is that if you're going to be working with, if you want to test event-based ingestion, and if you want to use multiple environments, and you're using something like GitHub Enterprise, where you have to use a GitHub app to get those events, it introduces some kind of interesting challenges that we sorted out, and I wanted to show kind of what the what solution we put in place. I'm not sure if this is like ideal solution, but this is a solution that's working for us right now. So maybe it'll inspire others, and you can share what you come up with in the future. So I'll give you kind of an overview of how it works. It's like, in the most minimal workflow, what you have is we have a user who is using the scaffolder. So they would use they would run a template, and that template would create some files, and one of those files would be like a catalog, catalog info file that has a component, let's say, in it. So it has a kind component. So that file gets pushed with a commit into GitHub Enterprise, and then that causes the webhook to go out to the Backstage to get that event ingested. So that's kind of like the entire flow. So that once the event gets ingested, then it shows up in the catalog and the user can see it. Now, the challenge here is that if you have multiple environments, so in simple dev cases, it's pretty straightforward. But if you have multiple environments, so you have a user, so what I'll show you here is we have 3 environments. We have dev, test, and prod. And if you have these 3 environments, then what's going to happen is when the user runs their Scaffolder workflow, and then they run in a dev instance, and they push a commit into GitHub Enterprise, well, that's actually going to notify every GitHub instance that is listing for events from that GitHub app, and so that component will actually end up in all 3 instances. And this makes a really messy situation, because if you're doing testing in one environment, then you start noticing components showing up in another, and so if you're pushing something to dev, so using dev environment, but then you end up having the same component showing up in test and prod as well, which is not what we want for a variety of reasons. One, of course, is that with prod, you don't want to have content in there that is not made for, that's not just production data. And in test, you end up getting a lot of clutter that might mess with your test cases. So ideally, what we want to have is separation, so that we don't have to. So that, if you're using dev environment and you push a component into a repository, it will only end up in the dev environment. So we'll show you kind of how we went about doing this, so I think it's kind of 3-step process. So first and foremost, we need some way to be able to identify different environments. So I'll give you an overview of kind of solution that we put in place, and then I'll kind of walk you through the steps. So what we did was we essentially created a we're using a special property in the YAML documents that signifies which environment that component is targeting. So if you're targeting dev environment, then there will be an entity in the YAML document. There would be like a devx environment property that has value dev. For test to be test, and for production we wouldn't have a value at all, because we don't want, for production, like our users don't care about like our development process, right? They're not involved in our day-to-day internal work of building the developer portal. So for them, they just want to use like normal Backstage, and they don't need to worry about which environment it's running in. But for these 2 other environments, it's required that any payload that gets ingested into Backstage has that devx dev or devx test property and value. So for us to be able to put that in place, so for us to have that information, first of all, what we need to do is we need to be able to differentiate the different environments. So what we did was, for dev, test, and prod, we added an environment setting which specified which environment we're using. So in catalog catalog.yaml, appconfig.yaml, we had the dev configuration. In the appconfig test that YAML, we have test configuration. In appconfig production YAML, we have prod configuration. So now this gives us the ability to differentiate between different environments where this is running. Then the next step is when we generate the YAML document, so we modified our templates to read the configuration from the from appconfig and include that configuration in the YAML documents. So essentially, every template was modified to include the setting from the setting from the appconfig, and we're using a placeholder to make that reusable. So essentially have a placeholder that we inject, that we apply to every template, and then that automatically includes the snippet of code that we need for the to turn on and turn off this flag. Because in production we actually don't want to have this property, so we need to. It was easiest to use that kind of reusable placeholder to inject this property. So now that once we've modified all of the templates, so all the templates are now reading the configuration from config of the site that the scaffolder is running in. Then the next step is we needed to make sure that that these entities, because the events are still going to be delivered in different environments, so we need to make sure that the catalog is able to differentiate these, and so the catalog is only ingesting things that are meant for that particular instance. So what we did was we created a processor that adds a validation step to the entities, so that if in a dev environment, if the entity doesn't have, if the entity has devx environment equals dev, so if the entity has property called devx environment and equals dev, then allow that entity to go to be ingested into the Backstage catalog. If you have, for test is the same thing, and for the prod, the only validation rule the validation that it requires is that devx environment is not defined. So we don't want to have that property there at all, and only in that case will it actually show up in prod. And then so the result, once we had this set up, what we have is each of the instances has the environment variable specified in the app config. Then we have the scaffolder including this environment variable. When we push the commit into enterprise, it gets routed to each of the instances, but the dev instance is the only one that matches that validation rule, and then that component ends up in the catalog. And the other two environments, they don't have that entity in the catalog. So that's the kind of the entire cycle. That's the kind of architecture that we put in place to make this work. Any questions? That's it for my presentation. I'm not sure if there are any questions.
Hey, Taras, I have a question.
Yeah.
So on this graph, going from the pushed commit from GitHub Enterprise, even before the sort of environment variables were set, I'm curious to know why is each environment getting that push rather than only dev and then being able to promote that to test and then to prod?
It's so the process that a client follows is that they have the dev environment that developers are using to kind of mess around with, and then there's test environment that's used by the QA folks to test the workflows, test the UX before taking it to production. So, and then there is the prod environment. So they so they would use like their workflows that they would use. They end up essentially using the same. They end up using it like it's basically in every environment, but there's just only one GitHub Enterprise that's used for all of the for all instances. So it will like essentially is because there's only one GitHub, like there's one GitHub Enterprise that's used for all instances, and so it essentially ends up like once you install the GitHub app on the different install the GitHub app on all different so this process is it gets with the GitHub app installation, it gets pretty hairy pretty quickly, but the workflow is you install the GitHub app on a specific organization that gives you the events from that organization, and it gives you the ability to push. Once it's installed, it then notifies all of the instances that are listening to those events, that are set up to listen to those events. I don't remember right off the top of my head exactly what how specifically that happened, but I do know that what happened was that it was really difficult to keep track of. And I think part of the problem is that there's no easy way to do cleanup. So you inevitably get events landing in different environments that you didn't mean to, simply because you're using a single GitHub Enterprise environment. And between trying to explain to people how the whole system works, and then making sure that they do the proper setup and cleanup after every test, all of that ended up being really complicated. It was easier to just put this in place than trying to explain to people just the right sequence of actions that they should take to make sure that nothing leaks from one place to the other.
Got it. Yeah, I don't fully understand GitHub Enterprise environments, but yeah, I'll kind of maybe take that away and take a look into it. Thanks.
Any other questions? Okay.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much for sharing, Taras. If anyone does have any questions, again, feel free to drop them into the Q&A. We'll keep an eye on it. And we can always circle back towards the end as well. But thank you for sharing, Taras. That was awesome. And up next, I want to hand across to Christopher, who is going to be talking about catalog adoption. So Christopher, over to you, sir.
Awesome, thank you very much. Can you all see my screen? Sweet. So my name's Chris, and I am an engineering manager for our developer platforms team at a company called RVO Health. If you haven't heard of RVO Health, we're a portfolio of brands that helps users find health information, doctors, and save money. Some of our brands include Healthline.com, Optum, and Healthgrades. And our developer platforms team is part of an internal platforms organization, and we serve around 300 developers. The company kind of had a unique way we came about. So two different companies essentially joined a joint venture, and so it wasn't net new, but we're a company as of a year ago. And so with bringing two companies together, I'm sure other people have seen this, like almost never do the tech stacks align, and like you have all of this stuff, right? And it's all like generating revenue and working, but it's kind of just everywhere. And so I think we had experience with Backstage prior to kind of the starting, and I think this Backstage slide really kind of like articulates like the problem or like why we reach for Backstage. So we know that we want to enable these existing teams and new teams to move really, really fast. We need to be able to scale, but like I think chaos control is like that main point. Like at a high level, for context, and what I'll get into is we have over 900 GitHub repos across 5 GitHub orgs, and that's growing every day. And that's kind of like the core where everything originates from. And so we knew we needed a way to kind of know like who owns what GitHub repo and like what's in there. And also like operating in the health space, this actually comes down to like regulatory requirements. And so putting Backstage, you know, kind of in our pipeline from, it wasn't day one, maybe 6 months in, we had a lot of work to do, but we knew that that was going to be crucial. And also just like a more developer friendly way to keep this information up to date. So I'm going to talk just like really quickly around our journey and ultimately how we got to, as of this morning, 73% adoption, which we're pretty stoked about. And our goal is to get to like 99% in the next like month or so. So we set up a Backstage instance. We kind of had it running, had to pivot and do a bunch of work for kind of just spinning up core infrastructure. And kind of the first challenge we were hit with is like, what do we use for users and groups? I think like many people probably face this, like you have competing sources for users and groups. So like we have GitHub Teams. You have like all these other systems that have the concept of teams. And ultimately what we landed on was using our IDP, so Okta, and we actually introduced a new way to manage groups. But we feel like it's the best decision in the long term, and when we're seeing signs of that. So essentially what we built was a way that people can self-service creating groups. Under the hood, they're just Okta groups with a certain like naming scheme. And then we ingest those specific, it's like prefix with a certain name. And so we're using like the open source Rody Okta entity provider to ingest those groups. And then we also ingest our users based on like their job function. So we ingest users that are like software engineers, data engineers, like technical product managers, etc. And so this worked pretty well, but it was definitely like the crux of getting going. And then we come to like, how do we think about GitHub repos in the software catalog? And so we kind of got down to this point where it's definitely not a one-to-one relationship between these 900 GitHub repos and software components, but in 95% of cases for us, it's true. So we kind of started off the bat to say like one GitHub repo should have at least one component. Now we have like some mono repos where people can add multiple components, and we just tell them to add it in the same file. And that's for like technical reasons. But ultimately, like if someone doesn't want to describe their whole like repo, we just want them to put a component at the root and tell us who owns this component. And so we kind of had the system working. We got to about like 6% adoption just by like referencing our group's repos. And so we were trying to figure out like what, like there's so much to solve. There's so many unknowns. There's so many people to talk to. Like we don't know all the use cases. But the one thing we did know is we wanted to get like some analytics in front of this before we release this to the whole org. We had some power users that were using it, but not really too many people. So we quite literally threw the kitchen sink at our Backstage instance. We had Datadog Rum, we had Google Analytics, we're users of the Spotify plugin bundle, so we had insights in there. And this was actually kind of a side tangent, but really cool. Before we rolled this out, we set a KPI for success to be 100 monthly active users. Just thinking of that whole approach of like, you know, if someone comes to Backstage once a month, we feel like that's worth our time investment. And this is not our data, this is off the Spotify plugin website, but we ultimately just upgraded to their latest release and are super pleased with kind of their insights dashboard. I looked today and we hit 150 monthly active users. So we were super impressed with what kind of rolling the software catalog out to do. That to say, like the Google Analytics plugin is super easy to install. And honestly, if we didn't pay for these, that's what we'd be using today. So I'd highly kind of check that out if you're looking to set kind of a success KPI based on user metrics. So finally, we were like, you know what, we need to ship this. We need to get feedback, and we need to start simple. So we're actually using another open source plugin for announcements, and we basically put the why, like why are we doing this and why is this important? We also focus on like what does a development team get once they do this work. Because while it might seem simple, like, hey, you know, put this file in your repo, like it actually does add a lot of work when you scale that out over 900 GitHub repos. So we had a super nice announcement with the why. And we also had really, really clear instructions on like what we're asking of these development teams. And ultimately, how we rolled this out was we created pull requests on every repo in our org. So essentially, we went through and we scripted out creating this like initial component file. And really the main thing we wanted to people to change was spec.owner, because that's what we really, really care about. We threw some like call outs of like, you can add links, you can change like spec.type. We came up with like a list of spec.types. And we did see some teams do that, but ultimately we wanted to start with ownership. And so this is a little out of date, but we started tracking basically how many components we had that originated from GitHub repos in an org, and we started tracking adoption. And so I think I talked about this in the SIG, and I think I used the word like guerrilla warfare. And like, honestly, that's kind of what it took. It was a lot of me like assigning pull requests to people out of just like context, like slacking people, archiving repos, like finding the right groups of people to kind of help me with this list. And we ultimately got to 68%. And now we're kind of have a script that fetches all of our repos, see if they're, you know, adopted or not. And now we're kind of sending lists out to the right people. Just because I think, you know, communication can get lost. There's not a lot going on. And so our goal is essentially to get this as close to 100% as we can. And then moving forward, we implemented kind of this automated process where we used like the eventing system, the open source eventing system, plus the GitHub module. And essentially on any like new repo creation event, we catch that event. We open up the pull request and assign it to the creator. And then we use Slack. So we go ahead and we take that pull request link and we shoot them a message to kind of introduce them to Backstage and kind of prompt them to merge this. I think over time, we'll probably build in like a nudging feature, because we're seeing like some people merge these, some people close them, some like, you know, like some people just leave them there. And so we've seen in other tools like success with like that Slack base. That's like where everyone is. Maybe you're on Teams or something else. And so that kind of, I was playing whack-a-mole for the last 2 months, like, oh, these new repos are getting created. I'm like running these scripts from my laptop and it just was not scaling. And then ultimately our long-term bet is the software catalog. So right now we're tracking new repo creation. No one's really using our templates. They're pretty basic, like a new GitHub repo or a tech docs template, but kind of this quarter we're investing in things like spinning up maybe like a Go backend API, like a TypeScript backend API, server-side rendered site. And our goal is to really drive the adoption of Backstage through software templates. So yeah, I kind of wanted to share this story because this was crucial. We always knew like if we could not adopt a software catalog, we would have much less value in our Backstage installation. And so like it was 100% challenging, but I think like the journey at this point is like really exciting, because now we've switched gears into more of kind of like innovation mode, and we're building, I think, much more developer friendly and like higher level features. But some challenges were like communication and instructions. So like blasting this out to 300 engineers is tough, and people are not going to read every detail. And I think we realize like we are ingrained in Backstage, like we're constantly looking at Backstage and in the community, and any of these other people are not, right? They're hands down keyboard building products. So just reiterating, being empathetic with people, I think was super crucial. I think like figuring out the technical way to make the developer experience as seamless as possible was a bit of a journey, like figuring out like what open source tools we had, how to stitch them together, building the story. So I think I gave about 5 presentations on like why Backstage, what is it, what are we doing with it? And so I think that built a lot of hype around this. We also partnered with kind of software engineering leadership. which I think was crucial to the adoption here, because they helped us get in the right rooms or Zooms to kind of tell our story, and they're super kind of behind what we're doing with it. And the last thing, I think I put ship it. I think we like held back a fair bit. I think we probably could have shipped the software catalog a month or two earlier, because we were kind of like, we were maybe scared of failure, and maybe I specifically was. But like ultimately you just have to kind of like ship it, iterate, and move forward. So that's kind of all I got. Thanks for letting me share that. I hope it maybe inspires someone or helps someone along their adoption journey.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing, dude. To open it up for any questions. Okay. If none now, if you do have a question, please do, as I say, if you hit the Q&A button down at the bottom, you can post a question there, and we will pick it up as we go along. I want to take us across, make sure I get the right tab. I want to take us across to the original agenda that we had posted for this session. And we did have a question on here about templates. Can you talk about creating a template and using that template to create a repo with the help of the Scaffolder plugin? Mr. Ben, would you be up for just taking us through a little bit around software templates and what the latest is there?
Yes, I can indeed. So this is going to be kind of a high-level, quick whistle-stop tour on the Scaffolder, I guess. Yeah, I'm not going to dive into too much of like extension possibilities with like custom field extensions and custom actions. It's going to be super high level. There's topics, there's documentation around all that sort of stuff, and it's kind of a big in-depth topic to go through. But I've got a sample app. I'm just going to try and share my screen. This is probably where Zoom complains at me for not giving permissions to stuff. One sec, how do I do this? Share screen, here we go. How do I do this? I'm not sure if this is going to work, but we'll give it a go. No, okay, I need to come back. 1 second.
Bye, Ben.
Yeah, I think I need to come back. This is embarrassing. Right, back in 1 second.
This is where we need some intermission music or some entertainment while we're waiting.
We had some the intro music. What happened to the intro music? We need to bring that back.
We should bring that back. We've been trying to kind of restart these, and unfortunately, I don't know if I've got the link to that anymore, but I will see if I can dig it out, and then we've got some decent intermission music and some kickoff music for it.
Nice.
I'm back. Did you miss me? Yeah, that was quite short. Right.
Let's very much. It was an awkward 2 minutes.
Again. Right. Let's go with code for now. All right. I'm hoping you can see this window. Some code, right? Yeah, cool.
Yes.
Okay, so this is just a create app, like a just a bare bones what you get out of the box of Backstage when you run the create app CLI. So we ship some sample data out of the box for you that populates into the catalog when you start Backstage. This is all in this examples folder here on the left. So you'll see that some fake entities here, and there's also some fake organization data here with some users, some guests, and we also have this thing called template here. So this is basically what a template definition looks like. So I'm going to just hide this content folder for now, but this is basically like a YAML definition in here, and it looks just like any Backstage entity. So you might recognize it from kind components, like what we've got before in this entities and organization stuff. So you'll see the special thing here is can template. We've got the envelope of like metadata and spec like we do in every other entity, which just defines what it's called and some human readable title and description. And then the two like main parts in this is this parameters block and the steps block. So the parameters part, so this is an array. I will also show what this looks like on the web browser in a second, but I just want to quickly run through this. So this is an array of parameters to the template. So this is basically gets rendered in a form in the UI, and you can go through that and fill out like little text boxes, UI inputs, like checkboxes, or however you feel. This is all JSON schema. So you basically say, if we just pop into this, we can see that we have a name property here, which is of type string. So that means you're going to get like a text box in the front end, and you're going to give it a name and a description to help the end user populate the data. And you can see there's two steps here. There's also this choose location part. So this is basically something a little bit more in depth, which is called a custom field extension, which is basically just a React component that we're going to render in front of the user as well. And in this case, this is basically a helper for people to be able to like type in like a repository in GitHub or GitLab or Azure, Bitbucket, however you feel. Yeah, so that's the parameters part. And then the steps part is basically the heavy lifting of the template, what's actually going to happen when somebody executes the template. So we can see here we've got a few steps. These steps will use the built-in actions that we ship out of the box with the scaffolder. But like I said earlier, there's also the possibility to provide your own actions, so you can provide your own custom business logic to do whatever you feel in this template run, right? So that might be registering like dashboards or whatever when you create a new component. It might be registering the system in the catalog, which is what we've got here. It can do whatever you like, right? So basically, the scaffolder will come along here. We'll take all this data that we requested from the user, and then that data can then be passed into these actions to then to basically do whatever we like with. So we'll see here in these steps that we've got here, we've got the fetch base, which is, or the fetch template. So remember I said this little content folder. This content folder is basically some like skeleton files that you can provide out of the that you can provide with a template. So templates can do anything. Like I said, this is a very simple template that just provides 3 files for you. One is just an index file that just has console log in it. It doesn't really do much. It's not a very interesting service. But you can see how we've got this templating syntax here, which is basically going to allow us to interpolate values that we request from the user and to put that into the new repo or the new the new files basically that we're going to use to create the repository from. We can also see we've got a catalog info file here. So this is very simple. Like this is all just like skeleton data that we're going to interpolate with values, and then we're going to push that to a repository. And then we've got a sample package JSON as well. So back to the template. So you can see we've got the fetch template. So that's going to grab all of that like framework files or boilerplate files. It's going to pass in the parameters of name that we get from this part in the properties part from the actual UI. And it's going to basically interpolate all that data into a working directory for us. And then the next step is to publish it to GitHub. So what this actually does is to create a repository in GitHub, to then create a commit and to go and push the working directory to Git or to GitHub. And then the last step is to actually register it in the catalog. So this is optional. Like Taras was saying earlier, I guess you don't need this step, right? Because you can basically ingest from the events part. But this is basically to register the final entity or the final repository that we've just pushed to GitHub into the catalog so that we can start operating on it. The output part, this becomes a little bit more usable or like more first class, I guess, in the scaffolder next work that's coming up here with the outputs of being a little bit more center stage. So I'm not really going to touch on this too much, but these are basically like what you want to give the user after the template is finished running, right? So in this case, we give them a link to the entity in the catalog, and we also give them a link to the repository that we just created. I'm going to go ahead and start this app and switch over to sharing Chrome so that you can all see what this actually looks like in real life. Let me try and share my Chrome window now. I guess you can also see an empty Chrome window, right? Or Backstage. Yeah, cool. Okay, so this template, here we go. This is the sample template that we get out of the box with Backstage. And remember I said there's input for the name, which is this little pot, this little field input. So I'm just going to go ahead and like type test. Oh, I've already done one, test YAML thing. Let's do that. Let's also call it test YAML thing 2. And we go next, and then we get the repo picker. So this is the custom React component that we've built and ship out of the box, but you can provide your own. You don't have to like register one field here. You can, like you can see here, we've got multiple inputs that generate one value. So we're going to GitHub. I'm just going to type in my demo organization and then some repository name that hopefully has not been taken before. We click next, we get to review this, and then once we click create is going to run through those steps that we saw in the YAML definition 2, fetching the content, going to create the repository, and then to go and register it in the catalog. You'll see here we've got these are the outputs that I was talking about. So this is like links to further the user experience after it's been created. So I can click to go to the repository. So you'll see here is the like boilerplate files with the parameters that we've taken from the user and interpolated them into these files. So you'll see that in this index.js, instead of having that template and syntax, we've actually got hello from test YAML thing 2. And yeah, also the catalog info file. So then this is also interpolated some values into here. And then the last step of that parameters of the steps in the scaffolder was to register it in the catalog, which is now over here. So this is how kind of templates work at a high level. This is super simple, the one that you get outside of the box. There is some more over at software templates, I think it is, over here. So these are some more demo templates that we provide also. These are not really meant for production. They're just kind of examples of like other templates that you can maybe provide inside your organization. So we've got one for like create React app. We've got one for creating pull requests to existing repositories. So say you've got like a monorepo, you want to add in another component inside the monorepo, you can create a pull request to do that. So it'll go ahead and go and add some new folder to a monorepo, like a new node module or whatever you like. The stuff with Spring Boot doesn't have to be JavaScript, right? It can also be Java. It can be anything you like. Yeah. So these are kind of some more involved examples. They get more complex. So you can see we require here a lot more information from the user. So we can take component ID, a package name, you know, the list goes on, like you can create whatever you like. And yeah, this is kind of super high level whistle stop tour of the scaffolder. There's a lot of documentation around, you know, extending the scaffolder, creating your own actions to do whatever business logic you like, to adding React your own field extensions with React components. I'm just going to head to the docs here and just show you where all this stuff is. I always forget this: core features, software templates. Yeah, so there's some documentations around creating your own actions, or the actions that we provide outside of the box to help you, get started with the scaffolder. Yeah, that's kind of all I had real planned. Is there any questions from anybody? I know most of you might have seen this already, but just a quick refresher, I guess.
Okay. If there's no questions right now, firstly, thanks Ben for the refresher and taking us through that. Of course, if you have questions outside of this session, you can reach out on Discord. You can find all the documentation on backstage.io that Ben's pointing us to here as well. But please don't kind of hesitate to reach out. Everybody in this community is incredibly helpful. So please do ask. We do have one question in the Q&A, but it's unrelated to software templates. I can see more than one maintainer, so I'm not going to specifically pick on you, Ben, for this one. But I can see more than one maintainer is here in the meeting with us. But apologies if I get this wrong. Chandana asks, hi, we do see more movement towards MUI v5, unified theme. Can we start building homepage plugins based on MUI v5 as of today? just checking if any of the maintainers are listening in and if they are able to answer that for us. Hello, Mr. Patrick.
Hello. Philip, do you want to talk? Or to put you on the spot?
You got this.
Okay. Well, correct me if I say anything that's incorrect. But so MUI v5, we essentially have started adding support for running both v4 and v5 in apps. With the previous release a month ago, we released the first version of that. And thanks to Philips and Andre and other people in the community, we've identified a couple of issues and fixed for the release that went out last week. And I think now you can, as long as you use the universal theme provider. So that is either if you haven't themed your app at all, then you're good. You got MUI 5 theming. Or if you have custom app themes, you need to move over to using the universal theme provider, the new theme APIs for creating those themes. And they will support v5 as well. And there are some migration helpers there. As long as you have that, you can start using v5 in your own app and using v5 in your own plugins. We will not start shipping plugins or other components with MUI v5 yet, because we don't want to force people to move over to v5 themes. But that's going to be fairly soon. Within a couple of releases, we will most likely start requiring that you migrate over to the unified theme provider to support both v4 and v5. Is that all?
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, that brings us to a close for this community session this month then. There will be, the recording of this video will go up onto YouTube in the next day or so. And there will be a new agenda posted into the community repo and onto Discord before the end of this week. So please, if you do have anything you'd like to discuss or demo, etc., please do sign up. For today, thank you to Taras, thank you to Christopher and Ben for taking us through those demos and discussion topics. Thank you to Patrick and Philip as well at the end there for covering us on MUI v5. It's been great to see this meeting grow a little bit as well. We're building our numbers for this session. Please do contribute. Please do take part in the upcoming community sessions. We will be back around the end of August. And I say that'll be posted into Discord and onto a new GitHub issue this week. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining. I hope you have a great rest of the week, and I will see you all out there in the community. Thanks, everybody.